Good evening, and we welcome you to Kolkata Center for Creativity. Kolkata Center for Creativity তরফ থেকে সকলকে স্বাগত জানাই। Before starting, I would like to introduce Kolkata Center for Creativity. It is a multidisciplinary interactive art center located in Kolkata. It works for inclusivity, capacity building, and well-being for artists and different communities and society through presentation, promotion, appreciation of different art discipline in cultural landscape of contemporary India. Today's talk session is on Raphael Sanzio, who was one of the great masters and architect of the Italian Renaissance. আজকে আমরা রাফায়েলের 500তম মৃত্যুবার্ষিকীতে আলোচনা করব তার শিল্পকর্ম এবং তার শিল্প অনুশীলন নিয়ে in collaboration with the Italian Institute of Culture, New Delhi. Before we begin, I would like to invite our director, Ms. Reena Dewan, to welcome everyone. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you, Moshmi.
Thank you, ma'am.
Good evening, everyone. On behalf of Kolkata Center for Creativity and our partner, the Italian Institute of Culture, New Delhi, it gives me immense pleasure to welcome you all to this evening's program celebrating the 500th anniversary of Raphael Sanzio. One of the most notable High Renaissance master, Raphael's influence has grown over the centuries, and as his books and documentaries have become more accessible, he also has emerged as an inspiration to art students and scholars everywhere, including in India. Today, we are fortunate to have with us two distinguished art historians, Mr. Nanak Ganguly and Professor Soumik Nandy Majumdar, who would help us understand Raphael and his art better. A very warm welcome to Nanak ji and Professor Soumik. Namaskar.
Namaskar.
Following this conversation, please stick around for an illustrated talk on the artist by historian Katerina Brazi Kastrakin. Enjoy the evening. Thank you.
আজ আমাদেরকে এই বিশেষ বিষয়টি সম্পর্কে অসাধারণ কিছু তথ্য জানতে সাহায্য করবেন দুজন বিশেষ ব্যক্তি। We have with us Mr. Nanak Ganguly, who is an independent curator and art critic. He has curated many shows in New York, Tokyo, Singapore, New Delhi, and London. And also we have with us Professor Soumik Nandy Majumdar, who is a faculty member in the Department of History of Art at Bhavana, Shantiniketan, and has been teaching history of Indian and East Asian art for last 25 years. Over to you, Soumik da.
Thank you, Moshmi. Thank you, Reena. And I also thank KCC, Kolkata Center for Creativity, for organizing this very important webinar on one of the greatest artists of all times, Raphael Sanzio. Now, we do have a wonderful presentation after our talk, our discussion, where we have already seen the presentation, and I know how smoothly, following a certain chronology, the presenter has traced the life and times of Raphael. So, and also the presentation happens to be full of very important information, historical facts, and also very important data of his time, following the chronological trajectory of Raphael. So I don't think there is any reason why we should repeat all those art historical facts which are already there in the presentation, and particularly when we have Nanukda with us, who has seen many of these paintings by Raphael in original. And on the contrary, I have not seen a single Raphael in original. So there is a wonderful contrast here. So there is somebody, Nanukda, who has seen the original paintings, some of the most important Raphael paintings in original. And I have seen through reproductions, now of course through internet, and in the pre-internet era, through various kinds of reproductions, including picture postcards. I'll come back to that. The circulation of Raphael as a painter in popular domain. That is something that we shall discuss at the later part of our talk. But to begin with, I would like to say that, so let us take this opportunity, Nanukda, to provide some very important leads to look back at some of the very important art historical aspects of Raphael and his significance as one of the greatest high Renaissance artists. And to begin with, I would like to then start with the almost, as you said the other day in our personal chat, that 1520 happens to be a magic number for us. 1520 is, of course, the death year of Raphael, and that is why today we are observing the 500th anniversary, death anniversary of Raphael. But as Nananda has been mentioning the other day on our personal chat, 1520 also happens to be the, or marked as the end of era, end of the high Renaissance. So let us begin by asking Nanugda that why it so happens that 1520 also happens to be the end of high Renaissance. Why is it a mere coincidence, or there's something more into it? Over to Nanugda. I think there is some technical snag, but before Nanugda comes back, can I continue and say a few words? Yes. So I think I would like to read out a small little passage from a very, very popular book, Western art history book, written by E.H. Gombrich, The Story of Art. And I would like to read out the passage where Gombrich is introducing Raphael for the first time in this book. And Gombrich writes, yes, Nanugda has come back. Just wait, Nanugda. I've just
can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you. Just
okay,
wait,
that's
Nanugda.
best. Because I had a problem with my laptop.
Very good, very good. You're back to your phone.
Yeah, I'm back to my phone. That's what happened the other day also.
Okay, okay. Thank you, Nanugda.
Yeah, so I'm back.
Yeah. I'm just going to ask you something about 1520.
Yeah.
Which happens to be coincidentally.
Yeah, I didn't hear you when you said 1520 is a magical number.
Very good. It's a magical number.
I know why.
So can you just elaborate on that?
Sure. Okay, sure. Soumik, hello Soumik, hello Reena ji, hello Moushumi and other members of the KCC there. Thank you for this wonderful seminar on Raphael. Now the point is, the first thing a student learns about art history when they enter a class, the professor tells him that 1520. Why 1520 is so important? The first thing that he learns in his first class is that's the year when Raphael died and the high Renaissance ended. Why is this? Because Leonardo died 2 years before 1520, and Titian died 2 years later or 2-3 years later, and Michelangelo died some 40 years later than that. But why those works which were done after 1520 is not considered to be high Renaissance? Because according to the canons of art, this is not on mere journalism that some writer or some reporter or some journalist, writes that you are a great painter, giving a full page kind of a kind of a story. It's something which is based on scholarship, because art history has nothing to do with journalism or newspaper articles. It is based on scholarship, and only you can build canons 100 years after the death of an artist, at least 100 years. That's what Panofsky said. And why is this? Because when great art historians like Bernard Berenson and others, or other German art historians, they went back to Florentine art, to the Renaissance period in Italy, in central Italy or some other places, they found out that only Raphael fulfilled all the principles of high Renaissance. Which were the principles of high Renaissance? Skepticism, individuality, secularism, rebirth of a style of the classical age, of antiquity, and more importantly, humanism. And to reach the pinnacle, to capture the beauty of the universe, Raphael fulfilled those. And you will see somebody, Titian, doing an excellent oil painter from Venice. He was brilliant, but his work in 1521 is not considered to be high Renaissance. Even a work done by Michelangelo, another superstar of the high Renaissance, or of the Renaissance, all of the Florentine art, all of that period, is not considered to be a Renaissance work or a high Renaissance work. 1520, from 1520, art historians mark that period up to 1600 as Mannerist work. Though we know some of the works in Raphael showed some early signs of Mannerism, in that stanza de la Provencera in the papal chamber. Some works. It showed that what is going to come 2-3 years down later. But Raphael fulfilled all the canons of High Renaissance. And I tell you, I reiterate once more, Soumik, and you know, you are a professor, you know, canons are based on scholarship. I, as a journalist doing an article in some newspaper, oh, Raphael was the best. It's not that. It's based on scholarship that proved that Raphael fulfilled all the canons, all the principles of High Renaissance. That's why with the death of Raphael, High Renaissance ends. Over to Soumik.
Yeah, thank you, Nanukda. Yeah, before we move on to a PowerPoint presentation that we have created with some very specific examples of works by Raphael, I would like to introduce Raphael in the way the famous art historian Gombrich has introduced Raphael in one of his most popular books of art history called The Story of Art. And I'm just reading out a small passage from that particular page inside the chapter, Renaissance chapter, when almost for the first time, Gombrich mentions Raphael. Because as Nanukda has already mentioned, we must remember when Raphael arrived at the scene, he already had this giant called Leonardo, who was 30 years elder than him. He already had that giant called Michelangelo, who was almost 8 years elder than him. I mean, look at the atmosphere in which Raphael had to work. So what does, and how does rather Gombrich introduce a Raphael? Let us see. Gombrich writes, at the time when Michelangelo and Leonardo were competing with each other in Florence in 1504, a young painter arrived there from a small city of Urbino in the province of Umbria. He was Raphael Sanzio, 1483 to 1520, who had done promising work in the workshop of the leader of the Umbrian school, Pietro Perugino, 1446 to 1523. And we are going to look at one particular painting by Perugino, along with another painting by Raphael, based on the same theme, the Marriage of Virgin, very soon. But before that, let me continue with what Gombrich has to say on that moment of arrival. Gombrich writes, like Michelangelo's master, Ghirlandaio, and Leonardo's master, Verrocchio, Raphael's teacher, Perugino, belonged to the generation of highly successful artists who needed a large staff of skilled apprentices to help them carry out the many commissions they received. Perugino was one of those masters whose sweet and devout manner in painting altarpieces commanded general respect. The problems with which earlier Quattrocento artists had wrestled with such zeal no longer presented much difficulty to him. Some of his most successful works, at any rate, show that he knew how to achieve a sense of depth without upsetting the balance of the design, and that he had learned to handle Leonardo's sfumato so as to avoid giving his figures a harsh and rigid appearance. So Raphael the young Raphael rather grew up in this atmosphere when, as Nanukda was saying, most of the canons were already set. The canons were ready. And Raphael grew up amidst those canons. Yet, this will be the most interesting part today, to see, or at least to try to understand, how he transcended those, how he almost kind of, how to say, I don't really want to use the word defeat, but let me say, let us put it, he instead of kind of surrendering to the power of the great masters, to the teachers, he actually kind of surpassed them on certain counts and became one of the most sought after artists, despite the fact that he died very young when he was hardly 37 years old. So when Raphael arrived in Florence, he was confronted with a stirring challenge. Leonardo and Michelangelo, the one his senior by 31 years, the other by 8 years, were setting up new standards in art, of which nobody had ever dreamed. Other young artists might have become discouraged by the reputations of these giants, but not Raphael. That was his power. Raphael was not to be defeated or not to be scared by the presence of these giants. Raphael was rather determined to learn. He must have known that he was at a disadvantage in some respects. He had neither the immense range of knowledge of Leonardo nor the power of Michelangelo. But while these two geniuses were difficult to get on with, unpredictable and elusive to ordinary mortals, Raphael was of a sweetness of temper which would command him to influential patrons. Moreover, he could work and work he would until he had caught up with the old masters. So that is why it is often said that Raphael's greatest paintings seem so effortless that one does not usually connect them with the idea of a hard and relentless work, despite the fact that he did work very, very hard. Needless to say that. So to many, Raphael is simply the painter of sweet Madonnas, which I'll be talking about later, and which have become so well known as hardly to be appreciated as a painting anymore. For Raphael's vision of the Holy Virgin has been adopted by subsequent generations in the same way as Michelangelo's conception of God and the Father. Because we later on, in the era of reproduction, we see cheap reproductions of these works in humble rooms, on t-shirts, on postcards, everywhere around us. So therefore, his art later became very obvious. But before we move on to that, we would like to get back to our presentation and start with what Nanak himself has said, the blockbuster, one of the greatest mind-boggling works done by Raphael, or for that matter, any Renaissance artist ever. So next image is the famous School of Athens done between the time 1509 and 11. So when he finished School of Athens, it's like in another 9 years, Raphael would pass away. So Nanak, why do you think that this was a blockbuster? Why do you think that this kind of helped Raphael to reach that pinnacle you're talking about? Over to Nanak.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Am I there?
Yeah, please.
Okay, there. Thank you so much, and also for mentioning Gombrich. But I would like to correct Gombrich a little bit. He was a great scholar, everything, but the timeline a little bit. From Urbino to Perugia to a well-kept secret, and then he went to Florence. And before he went to Florence, he went to a place, and a lot of people, they don't know, it's Siena. And a lot of visitors, those who flock to Florence or flock to Rome to have a look at the great Raphael paintings, they forget there is a chapel, there is a fresco in Siena Cathedral, which was done by Raphael. Because he was invited by Pinocchio, his friend, an Italian painter, and he painted it there. A lot of people, they don't know. So a lot of people, they go to Siena, to have a look at the Duccio's work and to compare with Giotto's work in Florence. But I come to School of Athens. Why I love School of Athens? Why School of Athens is a kind of a blockbuster? Because it made him a superstar in Rome. You have to imagine when he arrived Rome in 1508. Yes, in 1508, there were already two giants there. Bramante, who was Pope Julius' pet architect. He was another superstar, and 2 doors away from the Sistine Chapel was inside the Sistine Chapel. Michelangelo was doing his fresco, his Sistine Chapel fresco, and we have to understand that he was only 23, as you said, or maybe 24, because if you calculate 1583 to 1508, so how many years? 23, 24. A young man. He's looking at the giants, there in Rome, he armed with a letter from Duke of Urbino's sister, and he arrives at the Pope's court, at the Pope's chamber, and he soon became a darling of the Pope. And there were other painters too, but the Pope forgot them, and he became his, blue-eyed artist, and he gave him to paint the frescoes in the papal chamber, in the papal library. The first thing he did was the School of Athens, and that owned the heart. And it was like a Friday film in India. When it is hit, you make fan clubs. You eulogize that hero, and soon Raphael became a hero, and that irked somebody like Michelangelo, who was fuming with rage because he was jealous of his success. A young man soon going to capture my throne. And why I like the School of Athens, my friends, those who are listening, is because there is a portrait of me there. You must be laughing. I must be joking. No, I want to see that portrait. And next to that portrait, among those great philosophers, is our Professor Soumik Nandy Majumdar. Can we zoom, Gaurav? Can we zoom and show that that scholar, that young scholar reading or writing something against the wall on the right-hand side?
Yeah. We can go to some of the details.
Yeah, some of the details. So if we can go to some of the details of School of Athens. No, School of Athens. You have to zoom. Yeah. The School of Athens. You have to go to school. Zoom it.
No, he can't zoom. It is a PowerPoint presentation.
Okay, you can't. Oh, sorry then. So School of Athens is what? School of Athens is about, because he painted 4 walls in the papal chamber, in the papal library. One, the philosophical school. The other is the theology, the fresco which talks about theology. The other is jurisprudence. The other is poetry. And here you see the philosophers. And remember, Shomni, not a single one of them are Christian. They belong to all pagan world, all these philosophers. You can see Socrates, and next to Socrates is Aristotle. Who is Socrates? Modeled after. How do you know that he's Socrates? He looked
the previous.
Because he looked.
Previous slide, please.
Where is this one?
Go up the previous slide.
The previous. Yeah. This is fine. Yeah, Socrates wearing a red robe and a maroon, in a garment. Socrates looks more like Leonardo. He looks more like Leonardo da Vinci. But Socrates, how do we know he's Socrates? Because the book he's carrying. How do we know the next who is standing to Socrates is Aristotle? Because the book is carrying, Ethics, his famous Ethics, where the whole discourse of ethics starts in philosophy. And trickles down to Spinoza, to today's Gilles Deleuze. So this how we know. And he has fashioned all these philosophers after them, and he has divided them into left and right. And look at the church, look at the vault, look at the pilasters, look at the niches. You will see Apollo on the left. You will see, your Venus on the right. And if you see the dome, it's designed after Bramante, after the pantheon of the Roman pantheon. So it's more of a Roman architecture that you see inside this Roman pantheon. Because you remember one thing, Bramante and Raphael, they were moving around a lot. And also with him, there was a painter called Lorenzo Lotto who came to assist him at times, though he helped him. But with Michelangelo and others, he had a very bad relation, because it was not due to Raphael. Raphael was a very affable kind of a chap. He was a very, very social kind of a chap, which Michelangelo was not. Michelangelo was more grumpy. He was not liking Raphael's presence. He felt threatened. There was a kind of, he felt an amount of insecurity there. And soon after, he went back to Florence because he had to do some commissions for for Medici chap. For his master Medici. And he came back later. To finish the Last Judgment. But that is a different art historical story. But what we see here is a pagan world, is the story of philosophers, is the story. And also you'll find Raphael there. He has painted him there. Between you will see that is Zoroaster and Ptolemy. Ptolemy holding the globe. And Raphael has intentionally placed him there. His self-portrait there.
Look at this.
Because why? Do you know why he's saying this? Why he has portrait there? Because he's saying to the world that an artist is also an intellectual. He's no more an artisan in the Renaissance world. He's also an intellectual per se. He is among the philosophers, among the scholars, among the thinkers. So people here, the people who are watching, the artists, my friends who are watching, you are also an intellectual. You are very much an intellectual. This
here you got that message.
That is what Renaissance is all about. Yeah.
Here, Manavda, you can see him,
yeah.
Manavda. Here
Yeah.
you can see him, Raphael, on the right hand
Yeah,
corner.
Raphael. Who is that Raphael? Why that artist? Because artists were more of an artisan during the medieval period, whom, you know, Umberto Eco has written a lot about the Middle Ages and all that. Now, with Renaissance and High Renaissance, it's bringing back the individuality Soumik, the individuality of an artist, where artist is portrayed here as an intellectual. You have to understand that artist is at par with other scholars, Greek philosophers, Roman scholars. You can see Ptolemy there.
Exactly.
You can see Zoroaster there. You can see Bramante. Bramante, who he has portrayed Bramante as Euclid, you know, doing those measurements, Euclidean geometry. And if you see the cloisters, in this cathedral, in this chapel, you will see it is designed after Bramante's design. Though he took over, you know, the designing and the architecture of Bramante, Raphael took over and he became the architect. Though that was because he died. So, and there's a scandal regarding his death. We are not going to discuss it, or we can discuss it here later on. That it was ended abruptly, and then ultimately Sistine Chapel was Sistine Chapel and the St. Peter's Basilica the Duomo was designed by Michelangelo after Raphael's death. He completed the whole thing. So this is I think, and you can see some figures there. If you see it closely, the School of Athens, you can see some of the figures. And what a walk it was! It kind of, you know, made the people, you know, it swept the people of Rome out of their feet. And also and he became so popular. Central Italy, Southern Italy, Milan. He became the most darling of all painters. But sadly, he didn't, you know, live long. So that's a very sad thing.
Exactly.
And also, do we have the other slides for the other four walls? And you remember a library, a papal chamber, a stanza della signatura. You can see, you know, Raphael's frescoes on the top, and books, you know, beneath, and how Pope was, and that was Pope's library. Wish we had a library like that, you know, with Raphael designing all my walls above, and I have books, you know, at this, just beneath them. So this is something only a Renaissance space and architecture could only produce. So you have to understand this beauty of Renaissance. So we can trace where he arrives at Rome. How he arrives at Rome. What is the kind of journey that he made? You know, from Urbino, from his father's, you know, studio to Perugia, where he was trained under Perugino, then to the secret travel, where a lot of people, they never mention, they never know. It's a well-kept secret, Rinaji. If you go, most of the tourists there, mostly the tourist people, the tourist agencies, they say, oh, we'll take you to Florence and to Rome, and then we'll take you back to whatever places you want to go. Right. But the point is, the miss one thing, which is Siena. Siena is equally important. If you want to see one of the greatest frescoes of Raphael, you have to go to Siena, but nobody goes. People, they go to Florence, and the next stop they think is Rome. But he went. This is a secret that I'm sharing with people here. If you open the books of art history, you will not find it there. This is something which I discovered in Italy, and then we talk about he was orphan. His father also died very young. I mean, his father died at a very early age, so he took charge of the studio with his stepmother. His mother died 2-3 years earlier, and when his father died, he was only 11 years old. But his father could realize his talent, what kind of painter he was. So he sent him to Perugino, another master. And Perugino was also popular during that period. He had 2 studios, one in Perugia, the other in Florence. And when he goes to Florence, when this chap Raphael, the young chap Raphael, in 1504, when he arrives in Florence, he sees 2 great masters, Leonardo and Michelangelo, and the whole world, the whole universe opened up from him, from the universe of Perugino. He got the taste of what great masters are like, and he copied, and he picked up. I'm not saying that he was a magpie, not that he was. I'm not using a very dirty word. He didn't plagiarize. He picked up. He learned, as we learn from our teachers, as Soumik students, they learn from Soumik. and they excelled the teacher. They went ahead. He went lot of steps ahead.
Yeah.
He and if Soumik, yeah.
Now
And if Soumik share that the marriage, the famous marriage of Madonna, you will understand what I am talking about. Yes, what I'm talking about.
That's what I'm sharing right now, Nanukda.
Yeah. Excellent,
Right
excellent.
Now, we have the two paintings on the same theme, the marriage of the Virgin, and one by Perugino, 1500, circa, and 1504. So you see the same theme painted by the teacher and the student around the same time, with a gap of maybe 4 years, 3 to 4 years. Now, what exactly is there in Raphael's paintings, which, as you said, make him kind of surpass his teacher, Perugino, despite the fact that Perugino was also kind of, he set a benchmark those days, being one of the greatest painters of his time. So what is the contribution of Raphael to this same theme, and almost following the same pattern, same composition, same kind of distribution of figures, yet there is something else in this painting by Raphael. And so this is a wonderful location where we can actually compare and see. And quickly, Nanuk, the Sina part that you were talking about, it has been mentioned in the presentation which will follow our talk. So the audience can actually see there the work, the fresco that Nanuka is talking about, and the Siena, which was a well-kept secret until recently, but now it has come to the art historical discussions in the books. So you can see that in the presentation, and you will also see this, the comparison between these two paintings. And it's a very important clue for us to understand Raphael in comparison with his teacher, Perugino. Right, Nanukda?
Yes,
so what according to you is something very special about this painting by Raphael, despite the fact the one that we see by Perugino is also a superb painting, no matter what.
Absolutely.
So what is there in Raphael's painting? So should we attribute the quality of effortlessness, the ease that people are talking about, that Gombrich is talking about repeatedly, the sense of effortlessness that we see in Raphael's paintings compared to his masters, where you can always see the hard labor, the work that has gone into it. And in case of Raphael, probably is that, do you think that is one of the most important contributions by Raphael to make his efforts less conspicuous, less obvious, less visible, and effortlessness becomes the most gripping quality, not only in this painting, but in most of his paintings? What do you think, Nanukda?
Absolutely, absolutely. I don't agree less with what you said. Absolutely, it was a great take and a kind of a vis-a-vis study what you made with Perugino and Raphael. You look at the Perugino painting; it's flat. You look at the verisimilitude. You look at the back, the way he has built up that building there, and the expanse and the landscape. But if you look at the Raphael's painting, you know, this is some special wording. He puts an emotional content into it. Somebody is coming who will save us, who will save the world, the savior of the world, the son of the God. The second painting, you know, it shows that. And the other one, it's more like it's an extension of late Gothic, mid-Renaissance, and then you can see that green figure in that Perugino painting, very much schematic, very much schemed after Giotto had a painting like this, more of a biblical nature. But when you shift your gaze to the Michelangelo painting, if you look at the building there, I mean, then a front, if you look, you just gazed into it, and you can see the building, you look at the landscape, and then you see the figures here, how they're divided. You can see the Virgin Mary, then her husband who is going to marry, the groom.
Correct.
It's all about it all talks about that this is something special. This is one marriage. If you look at the pallor of the skin, if you look at how the figures are interacting to each other, and you look at and you compare the figures, there is no interaction at all. I mean, they're just simply there as some kind of a missing characters. But here in Raphael, you can see how they're interacting to each other, as if they're silent. They know that this is a particular moment of the world, that somebody is coming to this world who will save us.
Yeah. Therefore, we can say this, Nananda, that in case of Raphael, the paintings transcend the prototype.
Absolutely.
In case of Raphael, the figures do not surrender to the typical Renaissance prototypes. The figures transcend them. As you have rightly mentioned.
That's exactly. Just one sec. Just one sec. Show me. That's what make Raphael a special painter, a virtuoso painter.
Virtuoso.
Great painter. That's why his paintings are of a different league altogether. He said he picked up the style. He picked up the capabilities. He looked at Perugino. He kind of, he learned from Perugino, but he took them and he made them his own. He made them his own Raphaelite painting. He added, he transcended. The word you said is perfect. He transcended to something which is Raphaelesque, which makes him far superior painter than his master. Perugino.
So he goes beyond prototype, and as you rightly mentioned, one can also see, and he does evoke that in a very powerful way, the emotional content, which is not just an enactment of a biblical theme. Now that when you go back to Perugino and many other great masters prior to Raphael, you can see, despite the fact that those are also great painters, often those paintings are enactments of biblical themes. In case of Raphael, it is no more an enactment, it is almost real, with real emotional content. And if we go to the next painting, which is of a very different nature, the famous portrait of Pope Julius II, done in 1511 and 12. Here, in fact, that emotional content is unmistakable, isn't it, Nananda? It is unmistakable.
Super.
We have never seen such portraits.
Absolutely.
Portraits before.
Have you seen?
It
created a trend of portraits. Imagine somebody sporting hair on the face before that, during the Renaissance. Renaissance is all about the fullness, all about the softness, all about the beauty. But he's doing a portrait of Julius like this, of Pope, who was a fierce man, who was distraught and sad. He looks pale, he looks ill, and he's sporting a beard. Can you imagine a portrait like that before that? Show me a single portrait before that. Somebody's sporting hair, sporting hair on his face. But here it is that you may say that there are some reasons why he was sporting a beard. Why the beard is there? Because he was not well. He was growing a beard, and he had a very he became ill when he was fighting with the French in Bologna. And also Pope was a fierce man, a proud man, a haughty man, and a cruel man. But look at his portrait. He's distraught. Who else would have dared other than Raphael to catch, and the momentum and something like that.
Yes, Nananda. And it is also very important to look at and study the gaze, where he's looking at. We have never seen such a portrait where the person is looking at something which is not within the frame, not outside the frame. Usually, you see in the
brilliant
portraits.
Absolutely, you nailed it.
You see the sitter is looking at the painter, at the eyes.
Absolutely.
There is a kind of an element of flamboyance, an element of show off, element of power. But as Nananda rightly pointed out, he has almost submitted to destiny. He has almost accepted a certain kind of defeat. So that is where the emotional content comes up with reference to.
But there's also a resolute. But there's some resolution that he made, that he will keep the beard. Until he drives the French out of the peninsula, of the Italian peninsula. That was his kind of a firm resolution. Until the French are driven out, I'm going to keep my beard. That's what I read in some historical books.
One can actually look at all the details, the fingers, the position of the fingers, position of the palm, the way it is, the left hand is resting on the left arm of the chair, things like that. Apparently it is a single image painting, but there's so much to look at. So it is the effortlessness, which is, in case of Raphael, which is often or could be.
And you look, and you also go to wear 2 rings. Yeah.
In fact, this effortlessness could be sometimes.
Look at the number of rings.
Exactly, the number of rings he is sporting. In fact, this effortlessness could be misleading. This is how I was but personally was misled to think that Raphael was a very sweet, light-hearted painter.
No, dear, no.
To look at. No, it was my earlier initial.
Okay. Yes.
Very young.
And, pretty and all, yes.
Yeah, very pretty, too pretty to be looked at.
Absolutely.
Again, compared to.
He was all about capture the beauty of the face.
Exactly, the giants like Leonardo and Michelangelo. So you see, there are things that need to be studied, need to be looked at in depth when we are talking about Raphael, and we can move on to.
And Soumik, hang on for a sec. Soumik, hang on for a sec. And these started a trend. In portraiture.
Exactly.
Especially if you see at the Mannerist period, you will see this trend started to make portraits like this. Not that, 3/4 kind of a pyramid style that the Leonardo did with Mona Lisa and all the Virgin on the rocks and all that. But here a trend started with the portraits. You will see, and also Raphael followed that, that pyramidical kind of a 3/4 kind of a pyramidical kind of a composition with the portraits. But here you can see it's totally different. Then you say that he looks down, not at the sitter. Not at the painter as a sitter. He looks so distraught. And look at the defeatist. He's and also at the same time he was not well. I think he was down with a virus or something. He was very unwell, and he will die. Jokes apart, he will die maybe with some COVID-15-20 then.
And so it's very important to understand what exactly Raphael was trying to capture in portraits like this. Now we can move on to some of his iconic paintings, which are icons by its own merit. But before that, I must ask Mausumi how much time we are left with. Mausumi?
Sir, actually no time in our hand. Already 7:15.
Mausumi, we need another 100 days to talk about Raphael. Raphael is an unending, chapter. It's an unending topic. Actually, I don't want to stop here.
No.
Soumik, and especially when you have a scholar like Soumik, so you can chat endlessly. You can aim endlessly with somebody. Sorry, absolutely misplaced. Oh, you are great.
I'm the one who has not seen a single original painting of.
Doesn't matter. It's the text that matters.
Now, but we have to give time for the presentation where the audience can actually follow Raphael chronologically from from the beginning to the end. So before we wind up, just let me have a quick look at we are left with 2 or 3 paintings. Some of his iconic paintings, for example, Sistine Madonna. We all know that Raphael has done many Madonnas, but he, as Nando has already said, he has set some trend, like setting a benchmark for the future generations. It's not a very easy matter. It's a great thing to do, and it's not a matter of joke. Now, once again, despite the fact these kind of paintings look very iconic, it also looks very iconic because, as we have already mentioned, even before we knew that these paintings, this kind of paintings were made by Raphael, we came to know these paintings through enormous number of picture postcards, Christmas cards, and we have seen the reproductions of these particular painting and many such paintings on various surfaces in our visual culture. So the circulation of paintings, it's very interesting that when we encountered the reproduction of, let us say, Mona Lisa, we immediately knew who the painter was. But when we encountered Sistine Madonna, like this one, and other Madonnas by Raphael, even before we came to know the name of the painter, we got familiar with these images. I think this is important for us to know. Over familiarity of some of these images by Raphael have kind of made us little off track, or misled us to look at Raphael as somebody too popular, too sweet, too pretty, not to be considered with a kind of same weightage the way we consider or look at giants like Michelangelo and Leonardo. Anyway, there's a lot to talk about these paintings also. But since we do not have any more time, just let me quickly draw your attention to one such beautiful detail like these cherubs in that same painting, where you can see they're down below on the lower frame of the painting. I mean, these cherubs, this couple of cherubs, they have like become some of the most iconic cherubs in Christian iconic paintings. Christian paintings, since this painting was done and painting was seen by the people, and we have never seen such cherubs with this kind of contemplative mood. As we have already mentioned, this is again a great example to prove that Raphael goes beyond the prototype. Raphael goes beyond the typical biblical prototype and infuses his imageries, his images with emotional content. That is one. And even when you look at Madonna, you look at the Virgin, you look at the child Christ, you can keep on discovering these elements. I mean, the humanism assumes a new dimension. Renaissance humanism assumes a new dimension at the hand of Raphael. And I think this is the last painting we have in the presentation. Again, the Holy Family, one of the sweetest, one of the prettiest families Christian world has ever produced in their imagination. And again, the prettiness comes not only from the beauty of the figures, but also from the effortlessness that you see in the paintings. This is something that we need to understand, that what a greatly gifted and talented painter Raphael was. To achieve this effortlessness so early in his life, again, was a great feat. I think this is where we have come to an end as far as our slideshow is concerned. And I would like to wind up our discussion here, and we can follow up the presentation. So thank you, Nanumda, once again.
Always. Thank you so much.
And now over to Moshumi.
Yes, sir. Now we would be showing a presentation on Raphael, discussing the painter's life and exemplary works of art.
Welcome to everybody. My name is Caterina Brazzi Castracane. I am an historian, and I am here to share with you some pearls about the short life of one of the most important painters of our history, Raphael Sanzio. Let me share with you my screen, and let me start with the first point. Raphael was not just an artist, but he was a man that the other around him called master. Master means that he was one of the most important artists of that time, a man who was able to change the history of art. This is one of the reasons why in this year we are celebrating the anniversary of his death. And we are doing it with a great exhibition organized in the Scuderia del Quirinale, one of the most popular museums in Rome. A great exhibition dedicated to the genius, to emphasize the grace and the power of his drawings and paintings. Actually, we had to say that despite of his early death, Raphael was enormously productive. And this is another reason why we celebrate him as a great painter. And together with Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo Buonarroti, he forms the great trinity of that period that we call the Renaissance. Renaissance means rebirth, and is a period in history of art that we paused during the 16th century. Everything that we know about Raphael's life is written in the masterpiece of Giorgio Vasari, Le vite degli artisti, Life of Artists. And Vasari told us that the short life of Raphael naturally falls into three different phases, and every phase is related with one particular zone of Italy. As you can see in this map, that shows us which was the political situation in Italy at the end of the 15th century, we can find three different areas where we can post the works of Raphael. The first area is Urbino and Perugia. The second one is Siena and Firenze, and the third one is Rome. That was at that time the city of the Pope. We had to start with Urbino. That is the city where Raphael was born in 1483. If you Google on the web Urbino, you could find and discover that is an UNESCO heritage, and is also a small city, noticed because it is an university city, and is also famous for its history. And the history of the city is linked with the figure of the Duke Federico da Montefeltro, who organized at the end of the 15th century a cultural cult around him. He was a man of arts, and also was a man who had the ability to attract to his court a lot of men of outstanding talents. Three of them are Donato Bramante, Piero della Francesca, and Leon Battista Alberti. And we talk later about Donato Bramante because he will be one of the architects of the new St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, but he will be also the man who will invite Raphael to come to Rome to work for the Pope. In Urbino at the time, there was another man. His name is Giovanni Santi, and he was the father of Raphael. According to Vasari, he was a painter, but he was a painter of no great merits or talents. But, however, he was a great man of culture, and so he introduced his son to the world of art and also to the world of the humanistic philosophy that was so important in that period. Raphael was a precocious and talented boy, and in a drawing of that period, we can see how was the idea of a boy who was able to realize something like this in just with 3 or 4 signs, creating a sort of masterpiece just with a pencil. This is the reason why, after his father's death in 1494, Raphael chose to change the horizon in front of him. And it's clear that his desire for knowledge was driving him to other destination where study and spend a lot of time with other artists. The first destination of his life is Perugia. And Perugia is the city where worked a master, Perugino, that will be the first master of Raphael. The name Perugino is linked with the name of the city, Perugia. Perugino chose Raphael as a pupil and also as a member of his worship. So they realized together for one important palace in downtown in the city, Collegio del Cambio, the frescoes for the audience room, for the Sala delle Udienze. And Perugino is the basis from who the great artist Raphael moved to be a genius. And we can see exactly this influence in the first masterpiece of Raphael, the Coronation of the Virgin. This is a part of a painting now housed in the Vatican Museum, but was realized for a private chapel, the Oddi Chapel, in the Church of San Francesco. In this masterpiece, you can see exactly the grace and the power, the line and the feelings of the figures in front of us. Look to the Holy Virgin, look to the angel. You can feel their feelings and their thoughts, and also you can let you understand which were the feelings of the angel and of all the orchestral scene that you can find at the back. Perugino had realized before one fresco for the Sistine Chapel, and this is one of the most important bases of the history of art, the giving of the keys. In this fresco, you can find exactly the right relation between architecture, perspective, and figures. The first line is displayed with Christ, the keys, and St. Peter in the center. And they are linked with the door of the temple, a modern temple, different from the other that are two different kind of triumph arch, realized looking to the antiquity, and all the scene is realized with a great opening to the landscape. The same effect you could find in another masterpiece of Perugino, The Marriage of the Virgin, where you can realize that there is a link between the Christ, the Virgin Mary, and the architecture on the back. You can see there is a sort of line from the head of the Christ to the door, and this door opening to the sky is something of the most painful representation of faith and divine in the history of art. From this scheme, from this pattern, Raphael realized 3 years later another painting. And you can find the difference in the architecture. The temple is changed, but remains the door inside the line. But also you can feel that the figures are less rigidly related with the architecture, and they are in their movement, in their position, more human than the others. This is the first point of the revolution of Raphael, and starting from this point, he will realize 3 small, great paintings. The first of them is called Three Graces. In this painting, you can find all the grace that he used from the past, from the antiquity, and the peculiar study about the female nudity. And you can see a modernity that is shown in the face and also in the relation between the 3 girls. The second masterpiece, housed in Paris, is dedicated to the figure of Saint Michael, the saint who destroy demons and devils as a night. And in this kind of imaging, you can feel a sort of narrative paintings with the idea of let us understand the history that defined the history of the church. The history where Saint Michael is an hero for the Catholic Church, and he is the man who was able to destroy the bad world, to transform the world in the best place to live. This thematic is also present in the third masterpiece, The Vision of Night, a romantic painting where we can see a night that is sleeping, and during is sleeping appear around him 2 figures to help him to fight for the church and also for religion too, with a book and with a flower that help him to realize that peaceful world that we see in the ideal vision of the church. After those 3 masterpieces, Raphael was ready to discover the great cities of art. First of all, Siena, where he arrived in 1502 at the invitation of another pupil of Perugino, Pinturicchio, and where he realized with him the cartoons for the frescoes in the Piccolomini libraries. But after Siena, he was ready to arrive in Florence, that was at that time the real heart of Renaissance. In Florence, he arrived at the end of the 1504. And in that city, he had the possibility and the opportunity to study the great master of the past. First of all, Leonardo, with this annunciation, perfect vision of the unity of the past, the Gothic architecture or pattern for the painting, and the palace, with different kind of figures, where the humanity of the sitters were changing the world of art. Second masterpiece that Raphael found in Florence is the David, that yesterday, but also now, is one of the icon of the beauty in the art, and is a perfect statue linked with the idea of the beauty of the ancient and the modern one. In the third phases, he discovered the Madonnas of Masaccio. And Masaccio is important because he's an artist who is posed with the one part of his art linked with the Gothic and one part linked to the modernity. What I'm saying is that if you look to his Madonna, you find that the position is more rigidly defined from other, but the face and the eyes or the smile of the baby is one of the first symbol to that represent changing art that speak a new language. All of these information are basically the first stars from Raphael work, and you realize quickly three different kinds of Madonna. The first one is the Madonna of Goldfinch, where you can find the sweetness and the completely different representation of the landscape after the body of her. The scene is a simple representation of a mother with two children, the young Jesus and son John the Baptist, and the child are playing with a goldfinch that is a symbol of what we'll see later, the Passion of Christ. But in that moment they are just a child, and they are playing, as you can imagine that two little boy can do also today in a garden or in a park. The same real modern feeling is remarkable in the other Madonna, the Madonna of the Meadow, where the landscape changed in the for the colors and for the sky, but in the babies are playing as we have seen before, in this case also with one symbol of the Passion of Christ. But I have to say it again, is the normality of those humans that could be the most important aspect that we notice in Raphael paintings. The same view is represented in the Belle Jardinière, a wonderful Louvre masterpiece, where I would like that you look to the different kind of nature, plants and trees that you can find around the body and the dress of the Madonna. And also in the last Madonna of this first part of Raphael's life, you can see that he was trying to transform the normally ideas of the Madonna, essentially a painting create for a private and personal devotion, in something that we could really call masterpiece. After this experience, he left Florence to arrive in Rome. Rome that is the heart of Christianity, and Rome that was the city of the Pope. In this case, by the end of 1508, Pope Julius II, in this case portrayed by Raphael at the end of 1512, was the man who called him to realize his private apartment and private library. 4 different rooms that Raphael painted inside the Vatican Palace in Rome. We can see in the map that the rooms that we call in Italian stanze di Raffaello are 4. And you can see that are Sala di Costantino, Stanza di Eliodoro, Stanza della Segnatura, and Stanza dell'Incendio di Borgo. We will pose our attention on 3 of the room, starting with the room of Segnatura, maybe the most important room in the history of art. In that room, Raphael realized a sequent series of frescoes, 2 of them posed on the largest wall in the room. The first one is called La Disputa, and is the fresco that you got in front. And you can see that is a great wall painted with different area. The higher part is completely related with the eternal divine representation of God and Christ. You find God, Christ, the Holy Virgin, and St. John the Baptist. Around them, a lot of prophets and the apostles that are talking about the divine aspects of life. The link between the divine part of the word and the humanity is posed basically on 4 books that are the representation of the word of Christ, the Vangeli. And behind those books, you can understand the main aspects of the theological representation of the word. This is the reason why in the lower part of the fresco you can find different philosophers and theologians that are talking about the mystery of faith and the mystery of religion. In this representation that has a pyramidal form, because on the top you can find God, and in the other part, on the left and on the right side, you can find like arms, the people and the humanity. You find a complicated representation of a concession, and is a real representation of great meet, but also a war of different point of view. Behind all the philosopher, you can recognize the profile of Dante Alighieri that you can see here, because Dante, who had written the great masterpiece of the Commedia, was at that time considered a theologist, has and in the same rule of other men of his time. In the wall, on the other part of the room, you find another frescoes dedicated to the school of Athens, the most important philosophical school in the history. And this fresco that is maybe the masterpiece of Raphael is completely related in the to the aim to discover another world that was represented together from the past, the present, and the future. What I'm saying is that the fresco is composed on three different parts. The first part is this huge architecture, where you can find different kind of symbol, like the arch, the sky, and a great allegory of what was the idea of the temple of antiquities. But this is also representation of a huge cathedral, basically painted from the design of Donato Bramante for the new Basilica di San Pietro, for the new St. Peter's Basilica. So this is the reason why we can talk about this architecture has a great representation of a fusion between the past and the present. The second point, and I have to say the central point of the fresco, is represented of those two men, Plato and Aristotle, two of the most important philosophers in the history. They are the culminating point of a representation where every single man is there to emphasize one aspect of the rationalism and of the power of the mind. Around Plato and Aristotle, in the lower part, you can see also the self-portrait of Raphael that you can see here in the lower part of the fresco. We are talking about him, and you can see exactly here with his face, and is posed near another important theologist of the time, Zoroaster. The second room is dedicated to peculiar mystery of the history of the church. And we will discover that in that room that we call the Stanza di Eliodoro, the great masterpiece is represented on one fresco that called The Liberation of St. Peter. In this case, we have to discover that Raphael started with complicated architectural plane in front of him, because this part that you can see in front of you is not a part that Raphael painted, but is a window, a real window inside the room. So Raphael should build narrative paintings that you can read from the left to the right to discover the beauty and the great lighting effect that you can see in all the three parts of the frescoes. The scene starts on the left and shows us the moment when St. Peter is liberated from the prison by an angel, and look to the last part of the fresco, where you can see St. Peter and the angel hand in hand that are coming out from the space, and this is the real representation of the triumph of faith and church. I was talking about three separate lighting effects that you can see in three moments. The first moment is the light of the torch that the soldier takes in his hand. The second one is the moonlight upon the Golgotha, the place where Christ, and in this case St. Peter, were found the death. And the last light is related with the angel and is a divine representation of the light. The light is also the important theme of the third room, the room dedicated to the fire in Borgo. Borgo is a neighborhood near the Vatican Palace, and this room was realized by scholars and pupils of Raphael, but this part that you can see in front of you was realized by Raphael. You can see that the fresco is, in this case, divided in two parts. The first part is related with this hero. He is Aeneas with his father Anchises, and they are coming from Troy. They are entering in a new place where they will build another city. This city will be called Rome. This is one of the myths of the foundation of the city. The second part is linked with this body, because you can feel and understand that the body in front of you is a sort of great anatomical study, and is the proof that Raphael looked to Michelangelo, that at the same time had finished the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, where he put in frescoes the great ability to draw the human body. After the death of the Pope Julius II, Raphael continued to work with the next Pope, Leo X, who was the son of Lorenzo dei Medici, Lorenzo il Magnifico. And he realized for him this portrait, where we can see the Pope in an informal kind of representation with a book, as we can understand that he was a man of a huge culture, and around him there are two cardinals who will be the sign of his power. But Raphael also realized 10 cartoons for the tapestry that the Pope put to hang on the wall of the Sistine Chapel. The tapestry that were woven in Brussels by the workshop of Van Helst, one of the most important workshop in this sector of that period, are now houses in the Vatican Museum in the Pinacoteca. But the cartoons are housed, as you can see, in the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. For the exhibition of the Scuderia del Quirinale, now in Rome, they decided to show us one tapestry, and this tapestry is dedicated to the sacrifice of Lystra. After the Pontifical Commission, Raphael became the Prince of Art, and he spent the last years of his life working for a private owner, as the banker Agostino Chigi, and he realized for him the great loggia of his palace, Villa La Farnesina, but also a man, Raphael, who realized the great portrait of the 16th century. First of all, the portrait of a woman that we are seeing in the rule of Venus. We called this painting La Fornarina, and where you can find exactly the deep magical effect that Raphael realized to emphasize the beauty of her body, posed on a backstage of dark and blue. The other great portrait that we how can I say, that we remember of that time is the portrait of Baldassar Castiglione, the man who was a cultural man but also a friend of Raphael, and a man from who start the new interpretation of the reality of portrait. You can understand the strong intensity of his eyes, and also discover in this unusual position the great experience of Raphael as portraitist. In this case, we can exactly understand what the man is thinking, and which is the ability of the painter to realize and to create a relation between the sitter and the figure and the man or the woman that are in front of the portrait, to understand which was the man they are seeing. The same effect is present in the masterpiece called La Velata, where this kind of language is transformed in a body language. She is wonderful, her beauty is known in all the chronicle books of the time. But in this case, she is giving to the painter, but also to us, a new kind of intimacy that you could read in her right hand. Well, the hand that she is putting on her body, on her heart, to declare and say something important to the man that is in front of her. You know, this is something new for the art. This kind of interpretation of art is what we called modernity. And everything in the history of art of the next centuries started with this point and with those great masterpieces of Raphael. The link between Raphael and the faith is more evident in this representation of the Holy Family, where you find again the figure of the Virgin Mary with two children, and you can notice the ability that we were talking about before, to create a normal situation of relation with the Virgin and the babies. But in this representation of the Holy Family, you can also find the figure of the Father, Saint Joseph, that posed on the back side of the painting, is here to represent the pain and the dolor of what we will see in the future. I mean, the death of Christ and the destiny of the Holy Family to be the icon of suffering. These sweetness and graceful kind of paintings is remarkable also in the Madonna called Sistina, the Sistine Virgin, where you find a baby with a different kind of eyes, as he is seeing in the future which kind of life he will pass through, but also in the epical figures of angels that you can find in the lower part of the painting. The angel that in the next century will become the great icon of pop art. And this is strange, but is interesting because show us how the revolution of Raphael art could broke every line and horizon to become an eternal form of art. And we are arriving to the finish, the end of our conference, seeing two more masterpieces. The first one is dedicated to Saint John the Baptist and was realized in 1511. And is a representation of the Saint John the Baptist, the boy that you saw in the last masterpiece, but in this case he's boy like a young man. And this representation of the saint is remarkable for the colors. Look to the dark and brown around him, but also for his perfect body. That is a link between the body of Michelangelo and also the body of the history of art that we will see in the next centuries. First of all, the body of man that we will discover in Caravaggio's masterpiece. And the last masterpiece is an unfinished masterpiece, a great painting that he realized in the moment while he died. And this representation of Christianity is basically divided in two parts. The higher part that is the representation of the transfiguration, the moment when Raphael told to his apostle and show them the divine part of him. The lower part of the representation is linked with the moment when all the sitters discovered that divine part, and is interested to notice that all the figures are realized with different kind of expression. And in this case, Raphael shows us and displays us a modernity that is a sort of prevision of what we will see in the future. Raphael died in Rome the 6th of April 1520, and his body was buried in one of the most important places of the city of Rome. In this case, we saw the artist painted by another French painter at the first part of the 19th century, and we choose this view of Raphael's death because near the baldachin we can see a sort of copy of the transfiguration that we have already saw. And this copy is posed here because when Raphael died, the masterpiece was posed upon his coffin. And after a funeral mass that was celebrated inside the Vatican Palace, the body of the master, as I was saying, was buried in a great temple of art, Pantheon, a great temple of antiquity that is in downtown in Rome, and that is maybe one of the more interested architecture of the past that we conserve in downtown as heritage. In this temple, one of the scholars of Raffaello, Madonna Lorenzetto, realized for him a great statue that is called Madonna del Sasso to protect the master for the next century. And this is the place where also today you can find scholars, visitors, students in front of the tomb of Raphael, just to say thanks to him for the work that he had done to transform the great part of our history of art. So we are arrived to the end, and so also I have to say thank you for your attention, and see you the next time to discover something else of our wonderful history of beauty. Thank you very much to all of you. Bye.
Now we will start our question answer session. My first question for Soumik Da from Rahul Dev. Would you like comment on the use of curtain on the upper edges of the painting Sistine Madonna? What is the symbolism of curtains? There must be some religious connotation to the curtains, I assume.
Yes, Moshe. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Well, as far as curtain is concerned, not only with regard to Raphael's this particular painting, Renaissance painting as a whole, or Christian painting in general, curtain has a long history of symbolism. Curtain as a Christian iconography, as a Christian symbol, has a very long and rich history. I'm not going into that because that requires a lot of time to discuss that. It also requires a lot of knowledge. But as far as this particular painting is concerned, Sistine Madonna by Raphael, well, as a viewer, the first thing that I'm drawn to is not really the symbolism of the curtain, but to the peculiar way in which the curtain is painted. Just above the figures, if you remember the painting. And in fact, it is the placement of the curtain is very conceptual, because you don't know where that curtain or the curtain rod is hanging from. The picture is not an interior. It's apparently it's exterior. It's actually a vision. If you go to the real meaning of the painting, the two saints on the two sides, standing on the two sides of Madonna, they're actually having a vision, and therefore Madonna and the child Christ, this composite group of two figures, they are floating. You can see the floating like feathers on a puff of cloud. Therefore, the very space they are occupying, this two figures, Madonna and the child Christ, is very ambiguous. Neither interior nor exterior. It is a vision. Therefore, the logical presence of curtain is absolutely, it doesn't merit any discussion, because there is there cannot be any logical explanation of the curtain in terms of a realistic space. Now, it is also important to see how the curtain has been placed in a way that it creates a certain kind of frame in a painting. It allows the painting to be composed in a perfect classical symmetrical way. A very typical kind of, you can say, a characteristic feature of Raphael's painting, particularly these iconic paintings. But what is very curious, and yeah, here at this point, I can also say that in Christian iconography, curtain, whenever there is a vision like this, curtain also plays, it refers to, symbolically, it refers to the presence of a temple, not directly, but the presence of an auspicious space. But in this painting, if you look at the curtain very carefully, particularly the curtain rod, it is sagging. Now, why it is sagging? I mean, this is a very strange detail one notices when one looks at the painting carefully. The curtain rod is sagging by the weight of the curtain. Why does Raphael do this when he's painting a painting rich with iconography, painting rich with symbolism, a painting that is not located in a realistic space? Everything is very iconographic, very symbolic. He could have painted the curtain in a very iconographic way. Why suddenly and this is yet to be explained. There are various conflicting explanations proposed by the great scholars on Renaissance from different European countries, but the debate is still there. It's a very interesting question. Thank you for asking this question. It's a very interesting question which has not been, I mean, it's a riddle. More than a question, it's a riddle which is yet to be solved. So there are certain Christian associations with the curtain because it refers to an entry to an auspicious space. It also refers to a space that you're looking at from inside a room, things like that. These are allusions. These are references, symbolic references. But however, in this painting, the sagging rod of the curtain creates a mystery, an enigma, which needs to be solved. This much I can say at this point. Moushumi.
Yes, sir. Another question for Nanavda from Mr. Shagnik Shortcut. Why did Raphael include Michelangelo at the last moment in his school of Athens, despite having a beetle Diverley with him? He is rather placed in a central position of the painting, portrayed as a thinker, intellectual.
Brilliant. Should I?
Audible, Nanavda?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, it's a brilliant because that figure of the Heraclitus, which he painted after, which he modeled after Michelangelo, has been added later after the painting has been completed. It was added with a wet cement. He added and he made that painting later. It's a brilliant thing because I think, after all, Michelangelo could be jealous of him. Michelangelo might have disliked him. Not why should I say might have disliked him. He disliked him. Even after some 40 years of his death, he was writing to Piombi that he never liked this chap because he was always stealing from me, though that was not true, because Raphael always were inspired by one of the finer elements of two great giants, by Leonardo and by Michelangelo. He treated them as teachers. So I think there's a kind of an oblique reference to his teacher indirectly, it's kind of an oblique reference indirectly. But what he did, what I like to make it very clear here, that though he picked up some of the nuances of Michelangelo's, greatness in his paintings, or maybe from Leonardo, but he appropriated as Raphael, not as a mere copier, and he made it so much Raphaelesque, and he took it to a different league altogether as a painter. That is the excellence of Raphael. That is the brilliance of Raphael. That is his, what should I say? That is his excellence as a painter. That's what makes Raphael a Raphael. He was not a mere copier. He liked Michelangelo because his figures, if If you look at this particular figure of Michelangelo, he is a grumpy old man sitting there. If you see at the School of Athens and the other figures, they're interacting with each other. But here is a man, he's lonely there, he's sitting there, writing on the block and doing his work, but that was Heraclitus. And Michelangelo also led his life like that. He led some kind of a seclusion. He lived in seclusion, didn't mix much, not a kind of a social chap as Raphael. So I think it was out of a reverence. Raphael thought he cannot leave out, Michelangelo. And this is a great hall. I mean, where he was, depicting, where he was painting great philosophers, great scholars, and modeled after sometime after Bramante, sometime after, after Leonardo. So why not Michelangelo? It probably came to him and he added it later. It was the final addition to the School of Athens, Over to Moushumi.
Yes, sir. We have reached the end of this session. Almost everyone would agree with me that we have learned so much through this discussion today. We would like to thank our two speakers, Nanak and Soumik, for participating in the discussion. And of course, those who were with us in the audience, because without them, this discussion would have been incomplete. We all probably want a session like this to never end, but kothao na kothao to amader shesh kortei hoy. We would request everyone to follow our page on Facebook and Instagram to receive more updates on upcoming events. Thanks once again. I thank everyone for the delightful evening we had together. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Soumik. Thank you, Reena.
Thank you, Nanukda.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Really enlightening. Actually, it felt that it should never end. And looking at the appetite of the audience, I think we should actually arrange for such a delightful evening once more, at least. Nanakda, I agree with you totally that we cannot really talk about him even this much in a small time that we had today. And fortunately, today, even the director of Italian Institute from Delhi, he was also listening to your conversation, and he also congratulated both of you for such a delightful evening. And he said, really, it is really a delight. Yes.
I'm also interrupting once again because I'm being criticized for interrupting, because it is such a lively audience. I couldn't maintain a protocol that just like this thing that you stop, then I start talking. But one thing, we have skipped out the gossips about Raphael, which is also equally entertaining. We haven't talked about the gossips.
Yes.
He was a very sociable man, a very amiable man. So maybe for some other evening or something.
Yeah.
And I'll share some more secrets about Raphael with you.
So I think we will do it over a glass of wine, a session. Everybody will join in with their tea, wine, whatever they want, and we'll do some adda gossip on Raphael.
And lastly,
Great. Okay,
1520.
Yeah.
The 1520, you learn the first thing in your art history class. The year Raphael died and the High Renaissance ended. That's where starts art history.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Thanks
much.
again.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, sir. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Good night.